Welcome back to Faith Foster Fire Life. Today, let's talk about 5 things to consider before becoming a foster parent. Okay, so you've been thinking about becoming a foster parent for a long time now, and you have so many questions. Today, we hope that you will consider the 5 topics we're going to talk about to help you narrow down that list about who you should take into your home. So, number 1 on our list is safety, and we're talking about the safety of the children in your home already. Now, this is something that we really didn't think about until we went into our foster care training classes with our agency. It didn't cross our mind that we should consider how old the children are in our family already before taking in a placement. A lot of times, you're just so focused on helping any child, you just want to love them, you just want to get them out of the bad situation that they're in, and you don't really consider these things. But something we learned that was vital to our foster care journey was birth order. So, typically, and most naturally, when a child is introduced into the family, they are the youngest one. It doesn't disrupt birth order. Of course, there are always exceptions to this in any family. Blended families are coming together often with kids that are the same age, or, a child was the youngest in their family, and then, mom or dad gets remarried and they're no longer the youngest. Something like that does happen. But in most cases, you want to minimize the change and the disruption in your own family by keeping in consideration birth order. So, for example, when we started fostering, our biological children were 7 and 10 years old. And so we had to take into consideration that we didn't want to take in a foster child who was older than our oldest. And not even older than our youngest. We didn't want to take in a child in between either. That causes competition, and it does really disrupt the flow of the family on an emotional and psychological level. In addition to that, your children's physical safety is at risk. Obviously, take into consideration you have a 10-year-old and you bring a 12-year-old into the home. It's very possible that you don't know everything about that child you're taking in. So you might get a call and they're saying that this child has no history of any behaviors. They were removed for neglect or something like that. And then you say yes, that child comes into the home, and lo and behold, this poor child has been the victim of abuse of some kind. And then through their trauma response, they then act that out on your 10-year-old. So you never want to put your own children or even current foster children in the place where they could be victimized. So there's many, many reasons why you should consider birth order when it comes to taking in a placement. So that's pretty easy one to figure out, right? If you have kids, then the general rule is to go a year or 2 younger than your youngest child, okay? So the second thing we want you to consider when you become a foster parent is whether you want to do generic foster care or specialized foster care. We talked about this in our previous video about there's such a great need for specialized foster homes that can take in medically fragile children. So if you have a gifting in a particular area, whether it's medical or behavioral needs or learning disabilities, then that is a huge, huge need in foster care. And sometimes people can get really scared of getting into specialized foster care because you know that you're going to get a child that's going to require more. But I will tell you from our experience, it sometimes is the best way to go. And let me explain that a little bit. When we first thought about becoming foster parents, our only experience was with foster families who did generic foster care. So these families did the basic training with in Rhode Island, it's DCYF, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. So they did their basic training with them, and then that was about it. They didn't get any further training. So they were left to just deal with whatever problems came kind of on their own. And we didn't want to do that. we went with a private agency called Casey Family Services. They're no longer doing direct foster care anymore, but they do have a foundation, and their services help foster care nationally now. But we had heard about Casey Family Services and found that they were a specialized foster agency who focused on kids with trauma issues. So these were children who had known, abuse or neglect, behavioral issues, had probably been in multiple placements where they had to be removed because of their behaviors. And that sounds scary, but when you have specialized training and you have a support team behind you, it's totally doable. So one of the problems in foster care is it's like there's a lot of unknowns. So when DCYF, for example, gets a call for a child, they're going on very limited information. So if you are a generic foster home with very basic training and very basic supports in place, and you're getting your calls directly from DCYF, then you're basically, it's an open book. You don't really know what you're getting, and you're not really prepared for it. We felt like if we were prepared ahead of time, then we would have much more successful placements, and that was very true for us. So that's the second thing you really want to consider. Do you want to just be a generic foster home or a specialized foster home? Okay, the third thing that you really need to consider is your lifestyle, okay? So a lot of people think that all these kids need is love and to be given whatever it is they're lacking in life, and everything will be great. And that's just not true. The most important thing that these kids need is consistency. They need to know that they can rely on the adults in their life. That's probably the number one thing that all of these children have lacked, is reliability from the adults in their life. And so if you are a family who typically has a very chaotic life, meaning, maybe you travel a lot, or you have people in and out of your home a lot, or anything that would work against consistency, you have to keep that in mind. You should change that way of life, at least temporarily, until the child in your home is at a place where they are kind of stabilized, where they really are exhibiting signs that they are safe. They're feeling safe, they're feeling loved, they're starting to trust you, things like that. The last thing you want to do is take a child into your home and just lavish them with trips and, lots of visitors. And that can be really challenging because sometimes the people in your life want to meet your new foster child. And we always kept it a rule that when we get a new placement, we would take at least a week or two, sometimes longer, depending on the child, before we even introduce them to our family and friends. They really needed to get used to us before they started meeting a bunch of new people. And we also very much limited where we went, and especially no trips, no vacations, nothing big like that. They needed to really slowly be able to trust the people they were living with before all of these other things started happening. And of course, the longer you have a child, you get to know them, you understand what kinds of things would upset them, what would trigger them, and you kind of go from there. So your lifestyle really needs to be taken into consideration. Along with the travel and meeting people and all of that, really consider how much more time it's going to take care of these children. So a lot of times you realize, you're going to have the responsibility of caring for another child. But oftentimes these children come along with a lot more physical demands and time demands. So to give you an example of a typical placement, they are going to have weekly visits with their biological parents, and that may mean one visit with mom, one visit with dad, maybe a third visit with siblings, and those are usually at least an hour long, and then you have to add in some travel time. They will also need to probably be seeing a therapist or medical appointments, because a lot of times the kids have missed medical appointments and need to have those addressed, and that's your responsibility. And also visits with caseworkers. So caseworkers check in weekly typically, at minimum monthly. And if you're working with a private agency, it's even more frequently. So your time commitment to the children is something else you should take into consideration along with the other lifestyle changes. The third thing you should consider when thinking about becoming a foster parent is the financial impact. So you are going to receive a stipend, which is an amount of money based per day, per child, to help curb the cost of caring for them. However, there are some things outside of that will impact your finances. The stipend is usually enough to cover basic things like the increase in food and utilities, clothing to an extent, but there's other ways to get around that as far as providing those kinds of needs, and we'll talk about that in a different video. But I'm going to give you an example of things that we did not consider before fostering. We had a Camry, a Toyota Camry, when we first started fostering, because it was just myself, my husband, and our 2 boys, and that car was fine. And then our first placement was a baby, and no big deal, right? We'll just pop the baby 3rd row, in the back seat in between the boys, no problem. Well, then we discovered we had no room for the stroller and all the other things. So very quickly, we were sitting at a dealership trading in our little Camry for an SUV. So that was an expense we weren't really considering. And then a year or 2 later, we ended up turning that car in to get a minivan because we were then taking in sibling groups and we needed a 7-passenger. We really could have used an 8-passenger at many points, but so does your vehicle fit the kind of placements you want to take? Do you have a 3rd row seat? Do you have a minivan? So those are things that you might not have thought about prior to your placement. Another strange thing that happened to us was while we were newly licensed, a couple of years in, they actually changed the lead laws in our state. So our house had passed our initial home study and all the safety inspections. And then about 3 years into fostering, they completely changed that and said that all of our woodwork, our previous home was built in the 1950s, and we had always maintained it, had fresh paint, nothing was chipping, all of that. But they said, nope, all of it has to go. Any original wood that has paint had to go because they assumed that at some point it was painted with a lead-based paint, and that was the new law. And that cost us a pretty penny. It worked out in the long run. We renovated our whole home and ended up selling it, and we live somewhere else now, which that was another thing. When we were buying our new home, we didn't want to go through the hassle of having to rehab another home as far as lead was concerned. So when we were looking for a new home, we had to make sure we bought one that was built after the lead law had gone into effect. So these are all things that you don't really think about before taking a placement, because you're just so focused on getting in there and getting a placement and taking care of these kids and loving them. So these are just some practical things that you really should consider. Okay. And along with that is furniture. And I think we'll talk more about that in a different video, about different ways you can utilize your community to get the things you need for your foster children. But aside from clothing, furniture is obviously potentially a big expense that you have to. Number 5 on our list of things to consider before becoming a foster parent is your support network, your personal support network. Now we're talking about all the different people in your life that can be a support to you. One of the things we were really surprised about was not everybody in our life was supportive of our decision to become foster parents and was comfortable with it. It just didn't cross our mind. We were just so passionate about it and just thought of it as such a good thing that it didn't even cross our minds that it might be uncomfortable for some people and that they would no longer be a part of our life the way they were previously. And this can be heartbreaking and it can be surprising, but I really want you to think about the people and talk to the people in your life honestly about the fact that you're thinking about becoming foster parents. It's not just a decision that affects you and your spouse and your children, your immediate family. Your extended family is going to feel the impact of you being a foster family. And you really want to talk about how that's going to impact them, how they feel about it. Not that it should change your decision ultimately, but just so that you will be prepared for how they may respond once you do get a placement. So consider the people in your family. Consider your friends, how they might respond, and whether or not they're comfortable with their children being around a foster family. And that sounds a little harsh, like why wouldn't someone? But we had personal experience with families that were, one, a little bit afraid of their young children to be around our foster children because they just didn't know the background of the foster child, and they thought maybe their child would be at risk playing with them, which is, you can have some understanding of that viewpoint. However, children at the playground could be in a bad situation and be playing together, or at school. So you can't really prevent that, but I can understand where people are coming from. Another thing that I didn't think about we did come across with one of our friends back when we first started fostering was they didn't really feel comfortable with their child becoming friends with our foster children because they knew it was a temporary situation, and they were trying to prevent their child from kind of being heartbroken over making friends with someone that was not going to be in their lives forever. So, these are some things that you don't really think about before you become a foster parent, and you just assume everyone's going to be supportive and happy for you and there for you. And it's not always the case. Again, no reason to not become a foster parent, but just so you're prepared. Some other people you could consider in your personal support network are your agency itself. The state agency, other than your social worker, they will be a person that you're going to be in communication with a lot, and they may, depending on their personality, be supportive, but I wouldn't rely on them as a person in your support network because they have so many cases that's really out of their wheelhouse to also be a personal support person for you on an ongoing basis. If you work with a private agency, then there is more staff available to be a personal support for your family, and that's really what they want to do. So some agencies actually have specific people that are just for you as a foster family to help you, and that's their complete role. So that would be another person. And then if you are a church member, your church will probably also be a very good resource for support, for prayer and for needs that you have, as far as like physical needs. And the other thing that is becoming more and more popular in communities is volunteer networks for foster families. So in Rhode Island, we have 3 that I can think of off the top of my head that are completely volunteer based. So these are just foster families who have come together to make an organization to help each other. So we are our own village, and so you can get connected with the village of foster families in your town or in your state that can really be such a blessing. They're going to be in your shoes so they know what it feels like, and they can be a great source of information for different resources for your kids. So those are some things you really want to consider too, because you don't want to jump into it thinking you can do it all on your own, or you and your spouse can do it all on your own. You really need to consider the other people in your life and who you can draw from to make it possible for the children to have a really successful stay at your home for, as little or as long as they need to. So I really hope that considering these things really gets your wheels turning. And of course, we're always here to talk about it in the comments and answer any more questions you have and any concerns you might be thinking of. And we will be talking about a lot more things with foster care in future videos. So any more things you have that you'd like us to talk about, leave those in the comments also. And make sure you subscribe and share our channel with others. And we hope that our family can be a blessing to your family.